I think he had the misfortune of being born into the 20th century. His fate was politics. It was not his taste. He didn't, for much of his life, he didn't like politics. And yet his abiding legacy is that I think, compared with almost every other contemporary political figure, he taught us much about the pitfalls of concentrated power, hubris, violence, and the remarkable potential for the powerless to become powerful. That was, I think, the central thing for which he should be remembered.
You say he was a reluctant politician. He did stay in elected office for over a decade. Tell us why you think he was such a reluctant politician.
You see, I don't think he was a reluctant politician. I think the evidence is dead against it. 4 presidencies in 2 countries over 13 years. And the evidence that I dug up in the run-up to the Velvet Revolution in November of 1989 suggests that actually he really wanted that top job. And there was quite a lot of manoeuvring that went on, some of it Machiavellian. His ex-wife, Olga, once said to a friend of hers that he loved political office and he didn't want to give it up. So one of the paradoxes, one of the strange things about Václav Havel is that almost 3/4 of his life is spent writing against politics, in favor of what he called living in the truth, and yet there is that period where he embraces political power and actually doesn't want to leave office. He rather enjoyed being on a political stage. I've written that he played the role of Ich-Spieler. You know, he played the role of himself in the castle, on stage before a domestic and global public. And he thought of it as a theatre performance. He was a man of the theatre. So the red, white and blue BMWs, Lou Reed and the Rolling Stones to the castle, a festival of democracy. I mean, you know, he liked all of that. Every political career usually ends in failure, and he ended that 13 years in office not very popular at home, although curiously on the global stage, you know, he preserved that reputation. So much can be learned about Václav Havel's attack on organized politics, and particularly the dangers of concentrated power. That, I think, is his great achievement. But also a lot can be learned about the pitfalls of going into parliamentary representative politics and having to deal with the push and shove of that politics, where I think he fared less well.
1989, of course, was a key year of 20th century history. Just give us a sense of the context of the Velvet Revolution, how important that was on the international stage.
Well, it fundamentally ended the Soviet Empire. And it also, I think, made possible the reintegration of Europe. His vision was always, as a great European, that of the Czechs and the Slovaks rejoining the mainstream of Europe, and that wish came true. I think some of the great political achievements in the early part of his office included a rapprochement with the Germans over the Sudeten question. That was very important, coming to terms with that terrible episode during the Nazi period. His basic political idea, which he defended in his plays and his poems and his political essays, was that the most powerless people have within them the capacity to upend the mightiest of regimes. And that was, of course, what exactly happened in those remarkable events of the autumn of 1989.
It was a remarkable time, as you say. The Berlin Wall fell. I remember the Ceausescu's being evicted from power just before Christmas of 1989. What was it about Havel and the Velvet Revolution that allowed it to succeed?
Many factors. I think its non-violent quality, at least in countries like Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, didn't frighten the authorities greatly. But I think that the fact that Gorbachev, from above, was prepared also not to use violence. So it was a basic maxim of Václav Havel that if you use violence, you're likely to elicit violence. And the converse is true, that if you use non-violent tactics, you're likely to effect compromises, much more likely to effect compromises. So that whole principle of living in the truth, the commitment to an organized civil society, building a civil society from below, was really his trademark idea. And in this respect, Havel was the key political thinker who had reflected on the failures of the Prague Spring in 1968. He made something of a Copernican revolution possible. His idea was, this empire cannot be overturned. This dominant party cannot be defeated by grabbing it from above, as Dubček had tried to do through a reforming of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. That rather it should be done from below. And this idea, of course, we've seen in practice through 2011 in the Arab uprisings. The same principle is at work, that the most ordinary people, through a conversation, through refusing to pay a tax or refusing to accept an order, can actually have dramatic effects on the whole power structure.
He was, as you say, a fundamentally political person, but if he hadn't gone into elected public office, he would still have been, a major player on the international stage. Yes. How do you think his reputation would stand today if we subtracted the political elements?
Well, it's a great counterfactual question, I think. One of his very close friends, Adam Michnik, who was his equivalent in Poland, urged him not to go in to formal politics, to stay outside of the system. Michnik himself became the editor of the most influential daily newspaper in Poland today, Gazeta Wyborcza, and exercised tremendous public influence as a public intellectual. Havel chose not to do that. The trimmings and trappings of power were attractive. There are moments where actually you have the feeling that for Havel, power was an aphrodisiac. And although, as I've mentioned, he did many good things in the early days in particular of his presidency, he also made some misjudgments, some really serious misjudgments. For instance, trying to change the constitution through a show of hands in Parliament. That was roundly defeated and it caused an uproar. Or his opposition to multi-party politics. He actually thought it was possible to have a transition to democracy with no parties. It's recorded, and I write about it in my biography, that in the first moment of meeting Chancellor Kohl, he says to an embarrassed Kohl, why don't we do a deal? Why don't we dissolve parties and have just one party? The Party of Europe. And also his belief, for instance, that markets could be eliminated in the transition to democracy. I mean, this was all symptomatic not of naivete, but of his earlier commitment to anti-politics. His abiding legacy is the reminder that democracies don't need heroes. That I would say that Václav Havel would have wished not to be put on a pedestal, that he would like to be remembered for his insistence, principled insistence, that honesty, courage, respect for rights, living in the truth, as he put it, are the really important political values of citizens in a democracy. I think that's how he should be remembered.
Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.